So this video is a high-speed camera that we rented, and we filmed arrows being shot into a target. And I want you to watch how they're flying versus a tuned arrow versus an untuned arrow. And you see that bend that you see there? Because that's going through an animal. Imagine that bend and what that robs you. You look at not fully recovered arrows, look how they shake and wiggle. Look at a fully recovered arrow and you can see a significant difference in how it reacts on a target. This was news to us, and when we ran this test, we said it was a failure because we didn't get the results we were looking for. We were actually trying to study something completely different. And when I saw that, Tim Nebel and Matt Zernzak actually took this footage. They said, man, this didn't work out. And I watched the footage, I said, it really worked out. We found something else here that we didn't intend to find. One, we know that whenever you're trying to, the analogy that Ryan always uses, when you're trying to hit a nail, you don't make the hammer crooked. You want the nodes of this arrow, every arrow has a node in the front and a node in the back, and you want them aligned whenever they're hitting the animal, and you're transferring energy. It's no different than throwing a right cross or a straight punch, depending on what hand you are. You don't want yourself to be crooked and all wonky. You want that force to be in a line from your foot, from the ground, your knee, your hip, your waist, your shoulders, your elbow, your wrist, your knuckles. It's no different than an arrow. If the arrow hits you at an angle, it's not going to have the same force as if it's like this. You can have the heaviest arrow in the world, and if it hit them like this, they're going to have whip marks on the side of it. Now, I'll tell you, Chris Perino is a friend of mine. He's one of the most successful traditional hunters that I know, and I have a ton of respect for him. And he doesn't tune he doesn't tune nothing. And I tease him that his animals die of tetanus because he uses wikis. He doesn't tune his bow, but he shoots good animals, and he does it in a very ethical way. What he does, he waits until they're extremely close, and he usually waits till it's quartering away and he's going for that offside leg. He'll let them walk otherwise. Have some of the highest success rates of any hunter out there. Doesn't do any of this. So if some of you are saying it don't matter, like I said up front, none of this matters compared to what's between your head and the decisions that you make. But this does not hurt. The most significant thing you can do to improve penetration if you have a penetration arrow is to get that arrow straight. It's as simple as that. Some misleading things that we've misconstrued is FOC. What you're watching here, I'll let you watch it again. The other thing I want you to notice when you watch these arrows, it doesn't snake through the air like we've always seen arrows do. When you watch an arrow shoot, these things aren't snaking. Forget when it hits the target. As it's going through the air, it's relatively straight. Every high-speed footage we've seen, or I had seen prior to this, you'd see that snaky arrow because we're watching Olympic recurves. And Olympic recurve people set up their arrows so that the node of their arrow rides on the strike plate or the plunger, depending on what type of weapon you use, the longest. That's where the arrow doesn't move. The most accurate arrow is where the node rides on the strike plate the longest. The node of the arrow can be, if you want to go home and check your arrows, you hit them against your thigh and you feel the vibration, and you just pinch it lightly and you keep riding that up until you find the longest vibration. So the node of this arrow is right here. I got a little bit of FOC in this. This arrow rides on the strike plate about right here. I'm not going to shoot as good as Brady Ellison. I got news for you. That's not as big of a deal to me as having an arrow that's not snaking through the air that might hit it on an angle even though the nodes are straight. So the advantage of FOC has nothing to do, a red flag if you're on social media, if someone says it's physics, just ignore them. Because show me in physics where FOC adds value, especially EFOC. It doesn't exist. You can't separate spine and FOC. A stiffer spine is going to deflect less when it hits an animal. So we don't know if the value is coming from the spine deflection or the FOC itself. What we can see FOC does is it moves the node of that arrow up, so where this arrow is not flexing, it moves it way up here, so these arrows are flying through the air straight. They're a little less forgiving, but at 15 yards, I don't need a whole lot. And that makes a big difference. EFOC is a step function degrade. It will make your arrow bounce. A lot of people think it goes knock high because it's heavy up front. That's not why. It'll make your arrow bounce and kick. 16 to 18% seems to be the sweet spot. That's an opinion. I haven't finalized that with statistics. What is a fact is FOC in of itself isn't adding a lot of value. Those arrows flying like that, they don't fly like we all thought they did. Those are target arrows at 14 and 16%. If you go interview the best archers in the world that are shooting in Ohio outdoors, they're all shooting 14 to 16%. If FOC was more accurate, I'm not saying this is a fact, I'm telling you what my opinion is. If it's more accurate, these boys that are competing would shoot high FOC. with recurves. They don't. So that's my logic. And I know if I get this too high in FOC, I can't get this thing to tune right. Does that make sense? Again, this is a peer review. I'm not spitting at you facts. I'm asking you to question my logic, and that's my logic. If that makes sense.
I got a question.
Yes, sir.
Like, how high of FOC are we talking?
18%.
No, but you said you're having issues with tuning.
If I get up around 20, 21, I can't get it. I can't get it. Yeah.
See, I'm running like 32%. And that's what a lot of people, they come in my shop, because I shoot trad and they have issues with penetration, and I run high FOC, extreme high FOC, and stiff, way stiffer than most people would shoot out of the trad bow shafts. And I literally have no issues. I mean, my arrow's stuck in the ground after it goes through a hall. I shot long ways to a 300-pound black bear through the scapula. I mean, and so I was just wondering, like how high. A lot of mine are like 22%, something like that, but I've built something really high.
And again, at 15 yards, it's not a problem.
Yeah,
you start mule deer hunting, you start hunting hogs where you got to shoot a little bit farther, and you're making heavy trade-offs in trajectory.
Yeah.
The final here is, whenever I got to this point, I called Ashby himself. I said, and he knows me, he knows my background, he knows what I do for a living. And it's not offensive to, people get mad at me for questioning some of his findings. When you're a scientist doing research, you put yourself in front of public and you do peer reviews and they hammer you on your research. It happens, it's normal. He wasn't offended at all. I respect the baseline research he did. I'm standing on the shoulder of giants and I'm moving from there. And I explained to him how I was, I explained to him my findings. He said, it's the significance. He goes, you don't see an improvement in FOC until you get through 1 inch of bone. 1 inch of bone, that's a lot. So, I mean, I'm not gonna make those trade-offs. That's my logic. I'm not saying I'm right or wrong. I'm saying you have trade-off decisions to make yourself, and that's the fact, that's the spectrum. What people read when they skim through that is say, oh, high FOC, we've gotta have it. What he actually writes is not until you go through 1 inch of bone. 1 inch bone is a lot. Are there any questions with my logic there?
I have a comment. Most of his studies are on African game, which are not North American game.
Correct.
It's not the same.
Right. Yeah, that's why I always bring the scapula of the bison with me, because there's some heavy bone there that you're never going to interact. And when you ask the ranch fairy, who's a marketing machine, when you ask him what the probability of going through a knuckle is, he can't tell you. With the ideal setup, what's the probability of going through the knuckle? He can't tell you. And stop talking. It's not a fact. Does it benefit you? Maybe, but you can't reliably get through it. There's people with aluminum arrows at 125 grains and a bloody Zwicky getting through knuckles. You shoot it 30 more times and you won't. There's a lot of variation there. Does that make sense? Right. Here we're gonna start talking about tuning really, really fast here. These are common problems and compromises. What I want you to see in this video isn't how pretty it flies. This is coming off a hill style bow that's not cut to center. Watch that arrow as it comes off my bow, how straight it is. I'm gonna walk you through how I get it that straight. The key for me, when I'm up close, the arrow comes off my string perfectly straight. It don't come off here, it don't come off here. I time the release of the knock perfectly so it's coming off straight. And then I tune the arrow. I call that tuning the arrow to the bow and the bow to the archer. I'll talk about that on the next slide. This is a key. I'm trying to give you guys something you don't normally hear. This is something you don't normally hear. That will make a significant difference in the sound of your arrow. If I take 5-inch feathers and I take my decimal meter, which I brought if we wanted to play with it tonight, and I put it next to a target, you get up in the morning and you shoot, that decimal meter will pick it up over the ambient noise around 12 yards of an average tuned arrow with 5-inch feathers. You take 4-inch flesh and a tuned arrow and you get it to 9 yards. That may not sound like a lot to you, but by the time you get done stacking up all the improvements, it might help. Now, if I lose my mind and I draw halfway and I don't aim my bow and I miss by 8 feet, all this technical stuff don't matter. Like I said, it's insignificant. But that's the reality. Some of the most common problems I see, and this was me when I first started, my natural point, and this is a heavy compromise. I'm not saying straightening your arrow is the right idea. If I were to draw my bow in an intuitive way, as Senior says, not the right way, I tend to hit left and high if I shoot instinctive. And I hit really consistently left and high. Because my arrow, because I have goofy posture, my arrow points this way. and I shoot it out of my bow. Well, when I'm tuning my arrow to hit what I'm aiming at, what am I doing? I'm going to tune that thing to go knock left, and I'm shooting a curveball back into the target. And I'm robbing my bow of energy. And I think this is what a lot of us are doing. When I hear people say that we don't have lethal equipment, I can challenge them. My pass-throughs are in the high 80s, not on hogs. That's another thing. But just normal whitetails, I'll get through most critters. I think a lot of us are starting off with our arrow pointed this way. The reason why we can't, best I can tell, is the old timers figured out that if they do this, they can straighten that bloody arrow into their eye. It ain't to reference it if you're scared to look at your arrow so you can't say you're instinctive. It's so they don't have to start with a curveball. I'm imagining some of the best old timers straightened her out and they ripped that shot and they started with a more efficient arrow. I see this a lot. Now, if you shoot consistent baseball-sized groups doing it the wrong way, and then you do it the new way, and you're like me, and now you shoot basketball-sized groups, you got some decisions to make. I'm not saying one's right and one's the other. Because guess what happens? When you're under pressure, you're going to shoot the way you shoot. I tried to shoot, I don't know if you guys heard me talk about it on the podcast or not. I went on a big mule deer hunt this year. I've been working a lot, haven't got to practice, so I decided to put sights on a bow. Remember me telling you I don't have any common sense? I decided to put sights on the bow, get it sighted in, and at 30 yards I can stack them up with a recurve. It's amazing. It's the most amazing thing in the world. I'm going to shoot mule deer all day long. I missed my bows are really quiet because I know how to tune. I'll get into that later. I missed my first mule deer at 12 yards. He was asleep. Nobody heard me shoot, so we moved over 5 yards. I missed my second mule deer. And then we move over another 7 yards, and there's a third mule deer there. Praise God he didn't give me a shot because I didn't want to shoot that bloody thing anymore. It's because I had sights on my bow. Well, how does Cody shoot whenever he's in kill mode? I lean my bow over and I shoot just like that. I don't shoot straight up and down. So that's why I'm saying what you do under pressure is what you need to consider in this trade-off. But if your arrow is pointing like this as it comes out of your bow and you want it to hit straight and you're tuning it to fly knock left into your target, you're robbing yourself of a tremendous amount of energy, which is why I believe my dad and his peers shot 65-pound bows. That's what they thought, and they didn't go through animals very much. I think that's one of the biggest problems we have. It's something you have to make a decision on yourself. The other thing I want you to consider is not how well a bow shoots in terms of what you can aim at, because we've already proven we're not accurate enough to really predict or sense good from bad. I would rather everyone ignore speed completely. Speed doesn't kill. Speed absolutely does not kill. I would rather you take a paper tuner, you get your new bow, you get your arrow tuned as well as you could, and you stand in front of it and you shoot 30 times and you keep track of the consistency of the tears. If you have no consistency, it could be your form, because your form comes first. You can only tune as well as your form. And there are some bows out there. I got about 37 bows. My wife's not in the room. 53 if I count ILF limbs in my lab right now. And there's about 30% of them that will not shoot the same tear. I can pick up that Toki, that Black Widow, and certainly that ILF, and I can shoot out of 30 about 24 to 26 bullet holes. And I have decent form, but not great form. The reason I like that is because I'm ate up with enough target panic to kill a horse. So if I'm trying to evaluate accuracy at 30 yards, I'll start getting my flinches and my little herky jerks, and I can't tell anything. I don't flinch at all on paper. And it's a great way for you to evaluate yourself, your form, and your bow. And your bow will get a lot quieter if you're doing that. But don't consider, can I shoot the difference? If we're shooting at 15 yards, I've got this Olympic style bow right here that all of you will hate. I do too. It's got 100% carbon fiber limbs. It's got a $700 sight that moves. It's got a stabilizer on it. It's got customized weights. It's got a nose button. And most of everyone in this room, there might be a few exceptions, can't shoot the difference at 15 yards between this and that Toki longbow. If you can't shoot the difference between this and this, then an arrow ain't going to make a difference. A broadhead ain't going to make a difference if we're evaluating accuracy. Does that make sense? That's where we get hung up in social media. Well, that doesn't matter. I can't shoot the difference. Can you tune the difference? Because almost everybody in here can improve their tune to their level of shooting, and their tune would improve. Most of you shoot better than you think. We just can't sight very well, is my theory. But I know for a fact we can't shoot the difference between a lot of these things. That doesn't mean it's not significant. What's significant to me is how consistently can I get that arrow out straight and quiet? That's my logic. The next up with that I see in terms of mistakes is they don't think that we can shoot I shouldn't put this up here. It was getting late when I wrote this. And I can see my wife didn't check. I said, old timers were doing this when most of you are shitting yellow. I shouldn't have wrote that. But I fight people all the time about this. And I learned how to tune from Denny Sturgis Jr. Denny Sturgis Jr. learned from Denny Sturgis. Denny Sturgis argued with Paul Gillon, which was a master wood arrowsmith. And they went to his shop and he proved to him with hill-style bows and wood arrows you can shoot perfect bullet holes. I argued with Denny. I'm sitting here right now telling you this. And I was arguing with Denny 2.5 years ago that you couldn't do it. You can. I've done it. People that tune like this can do it. It can be done. If your ASL is 3/4 inch out of alignment from tip to tip, guess what? You can't do it. I've got them hanging up in my lab, brand new, 3/4 inch. So you need to evaluate your equipment, which is where we'll go next. Don't try to chase a perfect tune if you want to start with your form. Start there before you come here, because your form dictates your tune. Next, you got to look at your arrow, your bow, and make sure it's in plane and it's aligned and that it can shoot the same way each time. If you pick up your bow and you measure the tiller and it's different every time, you're going to get a different tune every shot. Make sense? You won't be able to shoot the difference maybe, but you'll tune the difference. The next biggest mistake is overbowed. In the kill data, we don't see any advantage in lethality statistically between a 55-pound bow and a 45-pound bow. This is a theory, this is not a fact. I think some guys just get overbowed and their form can't shoot a decent arrow. Does that make sense? That's my theory. When I get up above 50 pounds, I start getting wonky. 48, I'm pretty good. I shoot right now at 41 pounds, and I'll be honest with you, I do it just to show people you can kill stuff with 41 pounds. I'm blowing through everything. But it's harder to shoot a 41-pound bow clean than it is a 45. If no one was looking, and I didn't have to tell anyone I'd be shooting 45 to 48, just because I have a sloppy release and it helps me a little bit. I shoot 41 so I can show people what can be done. And I zip through bears, I don't zip through pigs. When I hit what I'm aiming at, I have really good penetration. I pass through most of the time. But overbowed is a big problem. If you can shoot overbowed, that's fine. Shoot a tune. We'll walk through different methods, testing methods. If you're shooting a 60-pound bow and you can't get a consistent arrow flight, it's bad. That's bad energy. You're better off taking that energy off the bow and transferring it more efficiently. Opinion. The next up is the equipment trade-offs. Sound and shootability is far better than speed. Far better than speed. These hooks that you see here are Uka BX. They're now made by Nika. Nika copied Uka when Uka moved to China. These are $500. They used to be $1,000. That aggressive curve right there is about as aggressive as I can go and still shoot a decent tune. The moment, I don't say this on podcasts, I'll say it here. The moment I pick up a border, I can't shoot a straight tune for nothing. Every arrow is different. I pick up a Max 6 whatever with a super curve, every arrow is different. I'm talking 3-inch tears. The less curve you have, the more forgiving it is to the tiller variance that we as archers induce on the bow. That's why longbows tend to shoot like they're on turrets whenever you tune them. But aggressive curves that gain you, I told someone earlier, if you take those limbs next to a Black Widow, you got to shoot a Black Widow 6 pounds heavier to equal those limbs. That's great if you can tune it. If you can't tune it and it's shooting wonky and tearing and it sounds like a jackhammer going off, it's not helping you at all. I'd rather you shoot a quiet bow that's very stable. It just so happens a bow that tunes and holds its tune well is also easy to shoot and it's also quiet, because when the energy doesn't die, it just moves into sound and vibration, if that makes sense. So don't chase speed. Long draw archers have the toughest time. I help people tune in all the time, whether they buy the course or not. Long draw archers struggle, and it's usually because they're trying to shoot short bows. And it's the funniest thing in the world that I'll have a 6'3" ape standing in front of me going, I have trouble with a 66-inch bow in a tree. My God, you're 300 pounds. What do you mean you're having trouble with the bow? The bow, if you can hide yourself, the bow ain't a problem. If you're a big guy and you got a 30-inch draw, you are stressing the standard. The standard is 28 inches, and you should stay away from ILF. Bowyers that build wood short bows, they're designing those bows to be shot. Most ILF bows, like those limbs I just showed you, they're designed for 25-inch risers. If you put them on a 15-inch riser, they get wonky really, really fast. You can cheat, you can bring brace height down, but you're really stressing some of those limbs, especially if they have big curves. If you're shooting wood bows and you're a big monster guy with a 31-inch draw, and you say, oh, this bow just isn't that great, it may be because you're just pulling way too much on what that bow can handle. And what you'll see is those limbs start getting wonky. Wonky meaning I measure wonky when I did the study for Black Widow by using a push force sensor on the string with a laser. When I broke the plane of the laser, I measured the force. At 28 inches, it was X, and at 30 inches, it was 6 pounds less. So they start getting wonky. That's that lateral or torsional stiffness you're talking about. If you buy a big fancy set of limbs that Olympians use, like the Koreans, they're extremely stiff, and sloppy guys like me can't shoot them very good. So I tend to shoot $250 ILF limbs better than I do $1,000 ILF limbs. That's a choice you have to make. But those are the decision trade-offs you have to make. Shorter bows are more critical to shoot. No matter which way you cut the Snickers, you're going to end up with peanuts. That's a fact. Shorter bows are more critical to shoot. You might not be able to shoot a difference at 15 yards, but you'll be able to tune a difference. Unless you've just got outstanding form. Does that make sense? Let's see. The breaking point. I did a study whenever we were designing that riser for me personally and 2 other archers of different levels. 60 down to 60 inches were pretty good. When we get down around 58 inches, it was step function reduction in accuracy, not tune. I just threw that in there. Now we can actually get into if I can make this thing turn. There we go. We can get into the tuning part of it. So I decided to go after tuning. And this is a screenshot of the video I just showed you. And what I want you to see is how straight that aluminum arrow is coming off an ASL bow. It's not cut center. This is at Bear Camp, I think last year. Someone happened to be behind me. And it's not cut to center. It's a Howard Hill style bow, but it's CNC machined, so it's straight and plumb. And that's just a normal autumn orange XX75. Nothing fancy. And if you watch that video, it almost looks fake, like it's edited, because that arrow comes off my bow so straight. That arrow's coming off that string perfectly straight, so it doesn't have to correct itself. You'll hear people say, well, if your bow is shooting weak, adjust your brace height here. If it's shooting stiff, adjust your brace height here. I would ask you to reserve brace height adjustment for one thing, and that's timing the knock release off your string, and you're going to improve the sound of your bow significantly. You hear the old timers say, well, do 2 twists, listen, do 2 twists, listen. They're listening to that bouncing off the strike plate. And those old timers, some of them could hear it really well. What I do is I stand 3 feet off the paper instead of 6 feet, and I make that adjustment until I'm getting a perfect bullet hole right out of the bow. If that makes sense. Now I know my knock release. If you look at the path of the string, when you let go, and Senior can tell you this, the guys with the best releases, they can shoot closer to center shot. If you're a slob release like me, you got to have the center shot out a little bit. That string moves down in a pattern, it kind of enters this cul-de-sac here. It goes back and goes into vibrations. What you want to do with brace height is you're adjusting the release of that knock so that it's perfectly aligned with your center shot. If it's out here or it's out here, you're throwing a fishtail into that bow that's very hard to see, but you can hear it. Does that make sense to everybody? This isn't new. I didn't go do research and go, I found something new. I lie about it sometimes on podcasts, act like I invented this. Ken Beck, this is from his research. I had lunch with Ken Beck and I wrote down everything the man said. So this isn't new. This is forgotten. So if you just take the step of tuning your bow so that it's releasing the knock at the perfect time, you're going to gain a lot of energy. The next is knock fit. You don't want, when I was a kid, we'd bite knocks and we'd jab them on there so they'd stay on. There's a lot of good knocks. This just happens to be a AAE IP knock. You want the string, you want this to hang, and you want to be able to rotate your string and it not move the arrow, because as the arrow goes through this motion, you don't want that string being too tight and doing this to your bow. You want that string to be able to move in there, if that makes sense. And Jenkins does a tap trick. Senior, what do the Olympians do? Is it 5 inches off and it breaks and that's their test? They move it off the rest. You want to have a secure clip. Jenkins pops it with his fingers and it'll pop off. He said that's good. But you want to have that loose knock fit in that bow. Otherwise, you're going to induce a fishtail. If you take care of this, that's something that almost nobody knows. It's been lost, and something I wanted to bring to the table here. And this is a fact. If you start with an arrow straight, you're going to transfer more energy from your bow to the animal. And your arrow is going to be quieter because it's not hissing through the air. There's a reason why I get away with 2-inch 4-fletch. This happens to be 6-fletch. But I get away with that because my arrow's not whipping through the air like this as I shoot. Does that make sense? The precursor here is you have to keep brace height within your bow your specified range. You never want to violate that. It's there for a reason. And you want to adjust that so that your limbs aren't wonky as I defined it earlier. But inside of that, this is how you adjust your timing. Center shot is a lot more difficult to discuss because it's up to the individual and you have to know your own shot. I just adjusted center shot on that Olympic bow almost an eighth of the width of this arrow, and it made a night and day difference on if it felt plucky to me or not. Plucky means if I don't get a perfect release, the arrow's hitting laterally somewhere. You have to know how good you are because you have to know when something's off. I can tell you where to start it. When you line up your bow and the string is aligned to the right edge of your pile, the back of your insert, that's a great place to start it. Inside of that, to true center shot is entirely up to the archer's ability to move their fingers out of the way. You set center shot up because when that string comes off your finger, it's not perfectly aligned. You don't have jaw releases. The better you release, the closer to center shot you can be. But that's something each of you will have to find, and you have to realize every time you move center shot, the relationship between brace sight and center shot are confounded once again. They move together. Does that make sense? All right. Is there any questions on this? Does it make sense? Start with it. So I do this with 3 foot of paper. You can also shoot at distance and compare cast if you're a good enough shot. Or if you have a chronograph, you can adjust your brace height, and you can, if you move it out there a bit, you can actually see a speed difference because doesn't have a velocity decay. Those are the 3 ways you can do it. I use paper. The next biggest problem that people don't address, and it's the most misunderstood, is tiller. Tiller just means limb timing. It's just getting the limbs to land at the exact same time every time. Ryan shoots a bow like this. This is my buddy right here. My hunting partner right here, Ryan. This is how he shoots his bow. When he's at full draw, this is what he looks like. His tiller is wonky as hell.
Not now.
No, not now.
Not
But
now.
that's how when I found him, that's what he was doing. He goes, I can't figure out why I can't get clearance on my fletching. I got a good idea. Because when we took a Widow KB at a shooting clinic and we put scales on the top and on the bottom, and I asked everybody to draw it. The average was 4 pounds, the max was 9 pounds from one limb to the other. People are pulling their bows way out of tiller. This isn't something I can tell you exactly where to set tiller. You have to play with it in very, very, very small increments. If you have a metal bow, it's as easy as a tiller adjustment. That's not a weight adjustment, it's a tiller adjustment. Small little incremental changes. And you look at your velocity, you look at your cast, you listen to it. If you have a wood bow, you can play with your knock height, but you're pulling your bow out of center. It's going to have to overcome that. You're much better when you hear the old timers. When I interview them, you say, Cody, you have to learn how a longbow wants to be shot. I didn't know what that means. That means they're changing their grip pressure until they're getting the tiller right. So if you're shooting a bow and you like to heel the bow, but that bow wants to be pushed in the throat, you're putting way more pressure on one limb than the other, and you're going to get arrows bouncing off the rest. You got, Cody, I got 6 inches of knock height. It's going to look like a tomahawk going through the paper. You have to learn how your bow wants to get shot if you shoot wood. You can make small adjustments, but for the most part, that's it. And you have to look at your form. If you're doing this, or if you're torquing the string, or if you're heeling the bow way down low, you're pulling on one limb harder than you are the other. That's the biggest problem people have. Long bows are more tolerant of this than recurves. The bigger the hook, the worse this is. You'll see people shooting borders or really aggressive curves. You can watch that riser tipping their hand because they're engaging one limb before they're engaging the other. That's terrible. That arrow's going to come out of there like this. So you really need to pay attention to tiller, if that makes sense. Tiller's not, people make it sound confusing. You're just timing that limb. We talked about string pressure. We talked about shoulder alignment. I think we've got it. Are there any questions on what we covered so far? I feel like I'm skimming. We good to go? Make sense? A lot of people chase their tails, and I tell them tuning a bow when it goes south, it's almost like blood trail on a nice buck. You're better off, unless your hunting partner's colorblind like mine, you're better off having your partner blood trail, because I'm so eager to get to the buck, I start looking for the buck instead of the blood. I've seen people go into tail spins on tunes, and they're better off stopping before they cut 12 expensive arrows the wrong way. And here are some of the common things that I see in studies. Make sure your arrow components are concentric. Like when you spin your arrows, make sure they're straight. I don't know why, because I know the knot gets pushed in here and it should center, but if that thing's off, I don't know why, but it'll make this thing wobble. I can't explain it, but that's what happens. I'm not a physicist. Number your arrows, especially carbon arrows. If you shoot autumn orange. I love olive orange. If you shoot aluminum arrows, you don't have to number your arrows because they're amazing and they're extremely consistent and they're almost the exact same spine every time. If you shoot carbon arrows, I've seen 6 to 8 pounds of variance from arrow to arrow. If you go ask the best longbow archers in the world that shoot wood arrows in competition, what they sort to, they sort to 2 pounds before they can shoot a difference. So you want to number each arrow because as you're walking through one of these tuning methods, if arrow number 5 is always one way, just ignore that arrow and don't cut all your other arrows. That happens a lot. Square both ends of the arrow. Check your general bow specs. Don't shoot a bow that's got a brace height that's an inch too low or an inch too high or that's out of alignment. Ensure nock fit is good. We've talked about that. Use a quality string. Here's what I'm going to tell you. I've studied hundreds and hundreds of strings. I have them all there at the house. I've studied them all. I've spent months and months and months ghost buying strings, testing them. The crappiest string in the world is going to stretch ½ inch. The average string is going to stretch ¼ inch. Stretch isn't the problem. So if you're trying to decide to go with gore or with a compound fiber so it doesn't stretch versus D97, D97 stretches about ¼ inch. That's a few twists, you get it back and it's broken and you're ready to go. That's not the secret to a good string. A good string has equal tension on each bundle. You ever have a string that hits on the forearm all the time and you change the string out and it's better? That's because one of the bundles doesn't have equal tension and that travel pattern that we saw is gigantic. So make sure you have a quality string. Almost everybody that sells strings makes a pretty darn good string. I did all the study and there is nothing more frustrating than when you're a statistician go, oh, none of that matters, there's 3 months and about $700. Doesn't matter. Get a quality string, someone you like, somebody that can build a good string and go from there. Endless strings are not louder than Flemish strings. The bows behind me are some of the quietest bows you'll ever hear. Every time I shoot online, people go, my God, that's the quietest bow I've ever heard. Doesn't matter, it's because it's tuned. I shoot endless loop. I shoot endless loop because it's easier for those guys. I don't like the way they look, but it's easier for those guys to get equal tension on each bundle. And I'm picking fly shit out of pepper. Get a Flemish string that you like, most of them are very good. Make sure that the serving fits the knock and you're off to the races. Make sure it's broke in. Start with 4 silencers instead of 2. 4 silencers aren't better, but if you do like me and you cut too much and you need to cheat a little, you got 2 you can pull out. Make sense? And you can save your tune. Every now and then I'll just make an adjustment like, God, now I'm a little stiff. You got 2 silencers you can pull out and you get you right back. You can also move your silencers. As you move to the center of the string, it has a greater effect on slowing the string down. Set your center shot up, just like I showed you earlier, and make sure you use a tab or a glove that's broke in. I see that getting people a lot. The biggest problem people have, they start so out of whack, they get a false stiff or a false weak and they chase it. Make small incremental changes. KISS is what they call it in engineering. Small incremental changes, and when you don't see the result you should, go the other way, and you'll find it. Make sense? Next up are the methods of tuning. There's a lot of questions about this. It really depends on where you're at with your form. Your form dictates how precise you can tune. Paper is the most sensitive unless you can shoot accurately past 30, 35 yards. When you walk back, bare shaft, I don't know if you all noticed, you're like, oh, I'm getting good bare shaft to 20 yards. That don't mean nothing. Back up to 35. I can shoot in paper and I can equate to 30. Once you back up to 35, it's more precise than paper. But you can't have the herky-jerkies like me, which is why I rely on paper. So if you do walk-back tuning, it's my favorite. Almost anybody can do it. You start at 10 yards, you shoot an arrow, 20 yards, 30 yards, and you look for a signal. Am I flying left? Am I flying right? You don't have to be Robin Hood to see that signal, and you make your adjustments. I end every tune, no matter what, by me putting a broadhead on there and doing a walk-back tune. And if I get back to 35, 40, I almost always see some little small change I can make to get that back on straight. When you're doing your bare shaft tuning, it's very important not to chase your tail. Compound shooters call this chasing their pins. You see a compound guy move his pins, shoot, move his pins, shoot, move his pins. If you see variance from your bare shaft, from your flex, that's greater than your group, you can't make a change. Your group represents your variation from shot to shot. Let's say that you shoot a 12-inch group. If you see your bare shaft 8 inches away, that's not really a signal. Now, if you do that multiple times and you see a clear, consistent pattern, now you can do it. But don't do it off 1, do it off 3. Pay attention to what you're doing, and when you see something that's off, run a repeat. Make sense? You'll save yourself money in arrows. The next is paper tuning. Start at 3 feet, get it coming off the bow clean, back up to 6 feet. You're there, then get past 30 and do a walk back with a broadhead on there and you're dialed in. Your bow will be quieter, your cast will be better, and you'll get better penetration. That makes sense? So I can cut it
Say that
off.
again real quick, Cody.
What is it?
Say that again real quick. So you start at 3, then 6, then go to 30.
Yep, so I'll start, your arrow can't be wonky, right? You have to be pretty close to a tune. I'll get up to 3 feet, make sure it's coming off the screen clean, make any adjustments I need. With paper, then I'll go back to 6 feet and I'll shoot again. And there might be some adjustments there, might not, but as long as I'm getting bullet holes in both places, my next step is to put a broadhead on and move back to 35 and start doing a little bit of a walk back and seeing what minor adjustments I need. And that's as good as it gets. What the most important thing to know about tuning is that you're probably not tuning up to your ability, and you got to know when to start tuning and you got to know when to stop tuning, or it'll just cost you a bunch of money. That's it for what I got. Are there any questions? Good to go? All right, you all set? Sure.
On your fletching, you have a custom-made jig for your 6 fletch?
No,
or-
you can, you buy AAE makes a bits knob that'll do 4, 5, and 6.
Okay.
And there's no advantage to 6. I'm old, and I can see 5 better than 4. There is an advantage to with 2-inch from True Shield. You do get a better crosswind advantage with 4 fletch, 2-inch than you do like a 5, if your form will allow it and your tune will allow it. There is no advantage to 5 and 6. I can see the arrow fly better, and that's important whenever you gut shoot everything. So I put 5 on there, and now I'm just playing with 6.
Do you see micro diameters being an advantage because of tuning?
And crosswinds, so when you ask these archers that shoot outdoors, they all shoot micro. I can't find an insert that's affordable day 6 are great, but they're expensive as homemade sin. I'm not shooting a pig with a day 6 arrow. Shoot what's comfortable to you. If you're shooting an ASL, that micro diameter gets you closer to a decent center shot. A Black Widow's cut for 204, but they're so expensive. There's a slight advantage if you're shooting super long range, but we've tried that 10,000 times, Ryan and I, going to micro diameter. We miss hogs at 15 feet and go, thank God the wind wasn't a problem. You know what I mean? So, or 15 yards. So it's just what you're comfortable with. The larger the arrow, the stronger it's going to be. That's just the way it works. Like those Black Widow or Black Eagle vintage, that's about as good as it gets. 34 inches, you're going to find a tune in there somewhere, and they're large. Any other questions? You got
On
something?
those micros, I actually splurged and bought titanium inserts, and I'm yet to get one that we're going to put here. I broke every insert.
Is that right?
Yep.
You shooting that real heavy arrow?
Yep. And
Yeah.
so
Guys that
went
shoot
back
heavy
to-
arrows break a lot of.
I went back to standard diameter. So
I don't want to spend the money on it, but that's
$300
personal choice.
dozen is not ridiculous.
We good? All right, thanks.